Well, I am so excited to be here because I have a huge question for you. Okay, how did you do with agreements 1 and 2? Perfect, everything's good. They're like part of your heart now. Just it's all working. Me too. It's a moment by moment realization. And when we add today's agreement in, again, we're studying Don Miguel Ruiz's lovely little book called The Four Agreements. And it fits in really, really well with Unity teachings. And so a lot of Unity churches use this as a basic text. So what happens with today's agreement, and Dennis read a little bit about it, and is don't make assumptions. Now, I don't know about you, but I can tell you that moment by moment, when I meet someone on the street, I get a phone call, I flip into making an assumption. Oh, that person's angry. They must not like me. Oh, that person didn't look at me. There must be something wrong. And it's that instant reaction that if we can get our arms around not making assumptions, will change our life. And really, the three agreements come together in kind of is anybody from the dairy industry? A three-legged stool that you used to sit on and milk cows. It's a three-legged stool. And these three agreements come together to give us balance in our life. And then just wait till we get to the fourth agreement. Oh, it's really exciting. Anyway, but these three agreements, the first agreement, do you remember what it was? Impeccable with our word. The second agreement, again, don't take anything personally. And the third agreement today, don't make assumptions. Really, those three come together because it's a synergistic, they all work together. So we make an assumption, then we take it personally, and then our word fails, and then we make another assumption, and then we take it more personally, and then our word gets worse, and we are in a spiral. I called it a rabbit hole last week. We just kind of spiral down, 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 instead of living in the kingdom of heaven. So what if we focus on each of these three agreements? Again, as Don Miguel Ruiz says, gosh, they are really simple, but I will not say that they're easy. But if we focus on these three agreements, I believe that we'll put a basis in our life to be able to go forward and live in the kingdom of heaven, which is what Don Miguel Ruiz is helping us come to. And as I shared last week, in Unity, we know the truth that the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of hell are the same place. It's simply how we look at it. It's simply how we view it and how we bring our hearts to it. So anyway, this is a cycle, and Don Miguel Ruiz talks about it, making assumptions. We know what the other person's doing. We know what that other person's thinking. We know why they don't like us. We know why they did something bad to us. But is that the truth? Do we really know that? I know for myself, I don't. I have a vendor come in my office. I'm still working full-time, and I have a vendor come in my office, and they have a wonderful product to sell, and I'm like listening to him, and his voice is a little off, and he's not quite looking me in the eye, and after about 10 minutes, he finally says, well, I'm so sorry if you don't understand me. I mean, I was born deaf, and so I've learned over the years, and it totally opened my heart, and I understood where he was coming from, but I assumed, bad word, that he just wasn't any good at his job or he wasn't paying attention to me. But the reality was that he was really a survivor. He was really growing in his life being born deaf. So those are the pieces. And what Don Miguel Ruiz says is, do you know how you stop making assumptions? It was news to me. You ask questions. It was that simple. Ask a question. Say, sorry, I'm not understanding you. Could you explain that again? Hey, share with me, where are you coming from with that question? It looks like that you're angry with me. Could you just tell me, is there something I can help with? Did I do something, that I could do differently? But it's all in asking questions so that we can come to the bottom and understand where another is coming from. Whether that other is a sibling, a child, a friend, a coworker, somebody we meet in Publix, that we can stop and take a breath and say, let's not assume that I know what's going on, and let me ask a question. Let me just ask and say, gosh, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Could you just share with me what you're really saying? And those things will help us to be able to, again, live in the kingdom of heaven, not assume that someone is angry with us or whatever the assumption is, and that we come back to our center, open our hearts, and are able to embrace the reality of that situation. So I think these three agreements work together so wonderfully, but this one, not making assumptions, is really the biggest I think of the three. Don Miguel says the first and then the second, but this one's the key. This one was the key for me when I can put it in my head that I'm not going to assume that first thing that I get from someone. Now, Don Miguel says, really, as Dennis read, much of the sadness and drama we've lived in our lives is rooted in making assumptions and really taking them personally. We have another teaching that goes along with this really well, because what happens is if we make assumptions about other people, what we're doing is we're really creating a type of codependence with them. How they react to us determines how we're going to react, and so we're dependent on them. And really, I believe in life that we are partners with everyone, but if we don't stand in our own magnificence, stand in our own joy, stand with our heart open, ready to embrace the world, that all of a sudden we find ourselves being less than we really could be. And so by not making assumptions and by not letting someone else give us, Don Miguel refers to it as the garbage in their life, to take into our life, to nourish our life. So I think that, this third agreement is just like absolute perfection. But the codependence piece is something that we'll talk about more in the future, but we never want to be dependent on someone else for our own joy, for our own peace, for our own passion, for our own life. I'm not saying to not be in partnership with people and to not love people, but that we know that we stand as an independent person, fully imbued with all of the joy, all of the good, all that God is. We are that. Now, Don Miguel asks us to say, what are we trying to do here by assuming things? And it's really interesting. I really didn't think about it until I was going back through this chapter again. And he really talks about it that we're trying to control our life. We're trying to control our life. And in reality, we're trying to control the safety of our lives. And so I want to create this area around me where I know I'm safe, where I know no one's going to hurt me, and where I know that I'm in control. And that's all great when we know that we are safe, we're safe living within God, that we are whole and complete, we lack in nothing. We are the joy of God in this wonderful place. And the control is the thing that's the hardest, because if we live with an open heart, come into each situation with an open heart, we don't need to control it. So we don't need to be controllers of every situation, controllers of everything that comes along. We're able to go into a situation with an open heart, ask questions, not take anything personally, let the words that come from us be in integrity. And that is how we'll create a conversation and a spiral that takes us upwards towards the kingdom of heaven. Now, again, those three things, if we do them, those three things, if we make assumptions and we take it personally, what we're doing is we're giving away our personal power. And as we talked about 4 weeks ago, gosh, it was that long ago, when we talked about the introduction to the 4 agreements, we talked about being a victim. And one of the biggest teachings of unity is that we're not victims, that there's no one out there doing anything spiritually to us, that if we realize who and what we are, we live as that in this place, and that we are not victims. But if we take things personally, if we make assumptions, we go down that rabbit hole, all of a sudden we're a victim. The world is against us, people are against us, and I just want us to be able to take a breath and take a moment and put these 3 agreements in place. Now, the other piece is, what happens if we make an assumption and all of a sudden we share it with our neighbor, or we share it with a girlfriend, or we share it with somebody? It's the old game, You know, when you were in junior high school and you'd tell a secret to somebody and somebody else tell a secret to the next person, we'd pass it all along. What did they used to call it? A railroad or something. That's what it was, telephone. But the message that the last person got was different than the message the first person sent. And so as we translate things, as we share them with somebody else, the negative side of that can be called gossip. But the side I'm talking about here is really just that we're sharing. We're sharing a thought that we thought was true about someone. And I'm just saying that really keeps us in this victim mentality, because as we share and that next person shares and that next person shares, it's less and less of that original truth that was shared. So this agreement has a lot of pieces to it. And by working with it, by living as it, by using it as a technique in our lives, we will be able to get rid of, I would say, at least 90% of that stuff that's floating around in our life that may make us sad, that may make us distraught. And that's what these agreements really, really are meant to do. So when we ask questions, we clarify the situation. My background's as a scientist, and so I really like clarity. I like little numbers and lines that add up and things like that. And there was a day when I left that world. I knew I couldn't stay. I was working on my master's in biochemistry, if you can believe it. And I knew there was a moment when I couldn't sit in the lab anymore and add up columns of numbers and operate on animals and the things that I was doing. And I quit one day. And I said, well, what do I want to do in my life? And it's really funny. Both my parents are in the food business. And so all my life was, I am not going to go in the food business. Not going to do it. My dad worked 100 hours a week. My mom ran a deli. My mom cooked at home and sold food in a grocery store. So I went to cooking school. Who knew? I quit everything, went to a classic French cooking school and became a French chef. I thought this is going to be the end of, absolutely perfect. And it was. It expressed a passion of mine. But here I am. I'm managing a community association that has nothing to do with food. But the skills that I learned, the tools that I put in my tool belt from those experiences have brought me to this place. And I still love food and don't tell anybody, but I'm going to go to Rome this fall. And I'm looking for restaurants right now. If anybody's been in Rome and knows a good restaurant, I'm like open here. So I just want everyone to understand that life takes turns and life takes different journeys. And if we can put these 3 agreements in place, I wish I had known about these 3 agreements earlier in my life. Yeah, a lot earlier in my life. I don't know if any of you have gone through a divorce, but what happens is we come into a relationship and think, oh, I'm in love. This is absolutely wonderful. And this is a diamond in the rough over here. Not quite perfect, but, I can make him perfect. Trust me. And, a little tweak here, a little couple pounds here, a little stop smoking over here, those kind of things, and I can make him perfect. What that does is the reality is that if we live with our hearts open, we accept everyone as they are and know that there's nothing wrong with them. They are the perfection of God. They are the Christ inherent in this place. But when you go into a relationship based on this assumption that he's not quite perfect, but I can make him perfect, I can make it better, then all you're doing is trying to change that person and really not living with your heart open. And so this assumption has huge implications, because you can imagine the next thing about that is I'm going to make him better, and he should understand what I need. He should really understand that, I need dinner at night and he's off cooking in a restaurant. And I need to go away on weekends with him and he's working every Saturday. And those are the shoulds that we try and not say in our lives. Should is not a good word. And this is what comes back to, we're assuming, making assumption about a relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a child, whether it's a work relationship. When we make those assumptions and they're not based on the truth of who and what is going on in that moment, it's never going to be successful. And my marriage was not successful. And great guy, everyone loved him. Trust me, everyone loved him. But it was my expectation, my wanting to change him, to make him into the image of what I wanted, and to make myself then dependent on him for my joy. What I've been able to see here X amount of years later is that by looking at these techniques, I can see places in my life where I've done that, and I could have done it differently with these 3 agreements. And so I share that with you because it's a story that's many years old, but I think it applies to working relationships, it applies to community groups, it applies to volunteer organizations, it applies to any place where we're in relationship with others. Now, Don Miguel Ruiz, again, we talked about it a little bit earlier, says, you know why we do this? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Why do we do it? And it's really to make sure that we're safe. And safety is something I'd never really considered in my life, but I can see decisions I've made where I don't want somebody yelling at me. I don't want somebody telling me what to do. I maintain this core of safety around me. But what that does is it's like a little barricade in a way. People will say, well, we like you, Jeannine. You know, you're a nice person. You're a good hard worker, but I don't think I know you. That's a really hard thing for me to admit because I try to be open with everyone. And so this is an agreement, a safety agreement I put in my life years and years ago that I was going to be safe. No one was going to touch me inappropriately. Nobody was going to take money from me. Nobody was going to yell at me. And what that does here later in life is there's this little barricade kind of thing. And I work every day at knocking that barricade down. But as things happen, you can kind of put up little bricks again. So please know that the goal, I believe, of my life here at Unity, what I'm working to be and do is to see the Christ in every person that I see, to see the perfection of God, and to open my heart and not say, let me assume something about you. Let me ask you, what is it? What is it? What's the question? What's the debate? What's the issue? How can I help solve it? Instead of assuming that there's something wrong. So again, the 3 agreements come together really, really well. But the one thing it'll take is courage. It takes practice too, but it takes courage to want to look at our relationships. And it's not just the relationships with the other. It's not everyone out there. It's the relationship with me. My relationship with all of these things, these voices in my head that are saying, do this, do that, why are you looking at this, why are you doing that? To be able to look at those things that we say within ourselves, the angry moments, I dropped a glass the other day, I'm like, I just got mad at myself. I'm like, it was an accident, and so it's giving ourselves that little bit of a break, that little bit of love, that little bit of understanding. Because if we can't give it to ourselves, I don't really know how we can give it to another. And that's, I believe, what the core teaching is here, and really what the core of Unity's teachings are, that all learning is self-learning, all knowledge is self-knowledge, all love begins as self-love. And when we fill our own well, when we fill our own heart with love, from the overflow, we give. But again, it creates a deficit when we try to give love, give something that we're not full of ourselves. So I think all of these teachings come together into a really wonderful, wonderful place. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to reject ourselves or reject anyone else. And so I've told you a couple stories about my dad. I'll finish up with one here. So when I was in high school, I got a scholarship to go to the university to study science. But all I wanted to do was become a theater major. That's all I wanted to do. And so I talked to my dad and I said, I found this school, classic Shakespearean acting school out on the East Coast, and that's where I want to go. Well, it was a short discussion because actors don't make any money. There's no way you're doing that. You can do that when you're retired. And so I didn't do that. But you can see from the other side of that story that I went on and became a scientist, and I was working on my master's, and I could have stayed in that world, but I was not happy. It wasn't fulfilling me. And so I went in a different direction. And although I don't cook in restaurants anymore, I used all that experience, and I became a cooking school teacher, and I taught people, and I ran multiple restaurants, and I would teach people and work with people. So I love this teaching part as much as I love the cooking part. but I went into science and wanted to go into theater. And so, again, there's an agreement. I'm kind of coming back to theater. I volunteer all the time here in town at the Naples Players, and so I'm close to theater, but I definitely don't do it as my life. But I guess what I'm asking is that we just look at these three agreements, especially this one, that we do not make assumptions about other people, and see how that will really change your life. Now, I believe that what Don Miguel Ruiz in this whole book is talking about is getting us to a point where we can imagine a day. We can imagine a day where everyone does this, where everyone lives with their heart open, where everyone sees the other as the Christ, where no one makes assumptions, where we all ask questions and we all listen for the answers and we all come together into consensus. It never means that we all agree. I mean, we can disagree, but it's that we respect the other. And we respect the other's heart, and we respect the other as the Christ. And in that environment, I can see a world where we all do work together, and where challenges get solved, and the best answers come forward, and we make the entire world into the kingdom of heaven. Now, I'd like to ask Julianne and Stephen to come back up and finish with the last paragraph in this chapter from Don Miguel Ruiz. And in it he says, when you transform your whole dream, your whole movie of your life, like we talked about last week, wonderful things will happen in your life. What you need comes to you easily because God moves through you easily. This is the mastery of intention, the mastery of spirit, the mastery of love, the mastery of gratitude, and the mastery of life. This is the path to personal freedom. Bless you. I thank you so much. It's been my joy to talk with you this morning. Thank you. Thank you.